it all just comes down to your weight is the sum total of all the atoms in your body. Most of them are parts of water molecules because you're 60% water, but the rest of you, the 40% or 35% that is not water, that's carbon atoms with hydrogen and oxygen stuck to them. Fat molecules are literally nothing but carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen.
Welcome to this week's Escape Your Limits podcast. Today, we're speaking with the author of his diet myth busting book, Big Fat Myths, that claim to lift the veil on weight loss. He's also well known for his popular TED Talk on the subject. In this captivating interview, he shed some light on the biggest healthy eating and weight loss myths, how weight loss really works, and some controversial facts about keto diets that most people are not aware of. So do you know where the fat goes when you lose weight? Well, I didn't, and our guest is here to spill the beans and restore your confidence in common sense. So please welcome Mr. Ruben Meerman to this week's Escape Your Limits podcast. Ruben Meerman, thank you so much for joining us on today's Escape Your Limits podcast.
Nice to be here, thank you.
All the way from the Gold Coast in Australia. Mermaid Beach, is that correct?
Correct, beautiful Mermaid Beach. Very
good. So look, I'm going to dive straight into it, Ruben. I've been following you on YouTube. You've done a great TED Talk, which is really what hooked me. And then I followed up by reading your book, which was called Big Fat Myths. I probably want to start with the book. What I guess motivated you to sort of develop this strange obsession about losing weight and weight loss? What was the sort of origins of that particular interest, Ruben?
I think it's the same old story you've heard a million times. I lost a little bit of weight myself, and but because I've got a physics degree, when I lost weight, and I don't know, I've got a curious brain, I immediately wanted to know how did that work, which was maybe fueled on also by the fact that at the time I lost a little bit of weight. So I lost 16 kilograms, which I think is, I'm not good at converting to pounds, but around 30 pounds or something in about 6 months. But in the first little while, when I lost that weight, I just happened to be doing some research for a children's book, which was going to be all about poo and snot and farts and all that gross stuff, which kids love. And I had only just learnt myself for the first time what the composition of the stuff that comes out of your backside is and goes down the toilet. And I was quite amazed to discover that is number twos are mostly water, 75% water. And out of the 25% of the stuff that comes out of your backside that's not water, about a third of that is the fiber that you eat if you eat plants, and about a third of it roughly is bacteria. The point was, I realized when I've discovered I'd been losing weight that it definitely didn't come out through the toilet, and I just wanted to know where did it actually go, and that was the start of where are we at now? 8 years of obsession with the biochemistry of weight loss, because it's just fascinating and awesome.
Right. So I want to start with your book. I know there's a few things here that will probably get people within the space that I operate in. It will get, I know people sort of like, sort of what they call heckles will come up in some of this, but I want to just go through a few of them. And you got some I'd recommend people check out the book. I'm not going to give everything away, but I'd like to sort of touch on a few of the stories and examples that I thought were pretty interesting. So I think the first thing is that most people, and the belief, I certainly follow this belief, is you kind of need to eat clean to lose weight. And in your book, you give very interesting example of McDonald's and Twinkies to sort of say, well, look, actually, that's not the case. So tell me why you or your researchers led you to say, look, actually, if you want to lose weight, you don't have to actually eat clean, and it's not going to do you any harm either.
I hope I didn't come across as though I was saying it was cool to just eat whatever junk you like, because I'm not an advocate for any particular kind of diet. And my favorite saying from a nutrition lecturer that I got secondhand was that there's no such thing as junk food, only junk diets. In other words, one bit of junk food is not going to put you in an early grave if you have it once a week, perhaps. But if you're eating that stuff all the time, obviously you're increasing your risk of every disease known to man. So the point in the book that I'm making, though, is that in terms of if we're just tracking your weight and we're not actually tracking how healthy you are, so I'll separate these two really things that you shouldn't separate, but just for the purposes of this chat, if all you were concerned about was how heavy your body is and you didn't really care about your metabolic health, whether you're at risk of type 2 diabetes and heart attacks and all the other things, if that stuff didn't matter to you, then it doesn't matter what you eat. It's as long as you are eating less atoms than you are excreting out of your body, then your mass will go down, because all of your mass comes from the fact that you're made out of atoms. Atoms go into your body every day, atoms come out. And if there's less going in than it's coming out, you lose weight. And that can be, a really terrible diet, just Mars bars or Twinkie bars, or just one cheeseburger a week. Let's take it to the extreme. You eat one cheeseburger in 7 days, you're definitely going to lose weight. If it's a McDonald's cheeseburger, everyone's, going, oh, I can't eat that. And fair enough. I'm not saying the cheeseburgers are healthy, but if that's all you eat, there's no way that you're not going to lose weight. And so that's the only point really with that, which I think it gets lost a little bit. I think it's not that we overcomplicate anything, because it is super complicated. But for most people who just want to lose weight, I think that's really just a good thing to remember, that, you're not going to put on weight by eating one cheeseburger a week. It can't be done.
So I seem to, I was reading through it just earlier, and I thought there was a part in there, particularly about the McDonald's, that kind of says that where you mentioned, look, people are going to say, well, that's fine, but what is it doing to your health? But I thought there was some health markers that actually said this. Do you want to just go on?
I'm sorry. Yes, I do remark on that, because the guy who there's been a few people that have done very similar diets, or really crazy diets, so John Sisner's this bloke's name, and he made big news just for a short little time in America when he did it. He was a biology teacher, and he ate nothing but McDonald's. He was very overweight to begin with. In fact, in his own words, he was your couch potato or sloth or something like that. He referred to himself as. He was definitely into the range of obesity. And when you're that overweight, then it's well known that any amount of weight loss is even just 5 kilograms, or what's that, 10 pounds or so, is really good for all your health markers. So in his case, because he was, very overweight, that weight loss, no matter how he achieved it, was always going to be good for his metabolic health, I guess. But right. I don't want to come across as too much of an expert. I'm just reporting what he said. He gave his cholesterol. He gave all these amazing details, and so did Professor Mark Horb, who went on the Twinkie diet, and he also caused a big ruckus because he ate nothing but junk food from a convenience food store, so Twinkies, Oreos, but he just counted his calories and made sure he ate less than he expended, and that meant less atoms were going in, and he also lost weight. And actually, his markers got a little bit better too. So if you did this with 10,000 people and tracked 10,000, this is not a good scientific study we're referring to here. I don't know if you'd get the same results for everyone, but in those two cases, any amount of weight loss is going to be very good for you if you are overweight, and that's one thing we can be certain of. Right.
So the other one, which I've been working on, because I like a bit of nice bread, and I had actively been trying to and reduce my carbs, and I've got some pretty good results however that's happened. But one of the things that you mentioned is that carbs are not bad, and you give an example of a sort of an event in history. So why are you sort of not necessarily a carbs fan, but you're sort of saying, look, you don't need to get overly concerned about that either?
Okay. Well, since I wrote that book, I'd stand by everything that's in that book on carbs. The thing about the low carb movement is that they tend to assume that if you're saying anything positive about carbs, that you're knocking the low carb diet, which I'm not. I know plenty of people, including my sister, who either are or have been on the low carb diet. I know a couple of carnivores. I'm agnostic about whether or not that's, which diet's right. But what I say in the book is, if you're concerned about losing weight, then carbohydrates, yes, there's lots of hormone responses and insulin, and lots of things happen if you eat carbs compared to if you don't eat carbs when you're in ketosis, and it's fascinating. But again, if all you were really interested in was whether or not you're going to lose weight, then it doesn't matter if you're getting your carbon atoms from carbohydrates or from fat or protein. It just matters how many that you take in. However, there are very big metabolic differences that do happen, which are fascinating. And we can talk about those too, because there are some great facts that people don't know about the ketogenic diet, such as when you are in ketosis and you're making beta hydroxybutyrate, which is, one of the three ketones. So when you go into ketosis, you're turning fat into acetone, accidentally turning it into acetone. You're turning it into acetoacetate, which gets turned into beta hydroxybutyrate, because acetoacetate spontaneously will just sometimes pop off a carbon atom, which becomes carbon dioxide. Actually, two of them, and you get acetone. So when you are in ketosis, it's not quite fully understood why, but there might be very good biochemical reasons for why people feel so great when they first go into ketosis, or even some people keep that feeling of having lots of extra energy and a bit of euphoria. You've probably heard, no doubt, about the euphoric high that you get when you first go into ketosis. All that's fascinating.
Was that linked to the bit? Was that linked to the bit, Ruben, where you mentioned that sort of GHB drug, some of the similar chemicals that years ago they used to sell that in raves. So you're saying your body's able to naturally produce that? Is that right?
Well, you're not making GHB when you are on a ketogenic diet. You're making BHB, and the difference. Right. I did a little animation for an article in the Conversation about this. It's very hard to explain in words, but when you see the picture of the molecule beta hydroxybutyrate as opposed to gamma hydroxybutyrate, there's also alpha hydroxybutyrate. That alpha, beta, gamma just refers to like 1, 2, 3 or A, B, C. It's referring to where a oxygen atom is sitting on which out of 3 carbon atoms. And for beta hydroxybutyrate, it's sitting on the second of those. Like I say, this is very hard to explain in words, but if you look at this little animation that I did for the Conversation piece about the keto euphoria, which was actually co-written by Professor Andrew Brown, and I took my name off it because I don't want to get into fights with keto people.
No, you don't want to do that.
I don't mind.
Dangerous bunch.
Yeah. I'm all for them. They just get so offended so easily if you're not on the keto diet. But yeah, so when you're making beta hydroxybutyrate, that molecule is almost identical to gamma hydroxybutyrate, which is better known as the drug Fantasy or grievous bodily harm. And I did check with the world's expert on GHB, which hits a receptor in your brain called the GABA receptor, which gives you this, if you take a lot of it, it makes you feel amazing and high, but it can also be fatal. So it's dangerous taking GHB. BHB doesn't have that risk associated with it when you're on the keto diet, but it does hit the receptor. We know that from experiments. And so there's not been a trial to see if it's BHB really giving people that keto high. There's other theories as well, but it's just fascinating. I must go into ketosis sometime.
Right. So what you're saying then is that look, the carbs are not necessarily the best thing, but they're not bad. Yeah, okay. I'm sort of.
Look, carbs, I don't think carbs are bad at all, but they're obviously no good for you if you're trying to get into ketosis. So if you want to get into the ketosis and be on a ketogenic diet, then you have to eat less than, about 5% of your diet needs to come, or your energy needs to come from carbohydrates. And there's really good reasons for people doing that too. So for children who have epilepsy that can't be cured with drugs, then the ketogenic diet can reduce the number of epileptic fits they have. And that tells you a lot about the fact that there must be some active molecule in there that's doing something very differently in your brain than when you are eating a diet that does include carbohydrates. And so I'm definitely not anti the keto diet, but if you don't care about going keto or not, then it won't make a difference to you for your weight loss, if all else being equal.
Thank you for supporting the Escape Your Limits podcast. If you're thinking about creating a unique and engaging fitness space to take your fitness to the next level, then we have you covered. Escape Fitness design and manufacture some of the most innovative, attractive, and durable functional training and free weight equipment used by many of the best trainers and fitness brands across the globe. As a valued listener, we are offering you a 10% discount off many of the products on our website. You can check out the full range by going to escapefitness.com and use the code dumbbell. That's escapefitness.com using the code dumbbell. That's it from me. Please enjoy the rest of this interview. So I'm interested on this thing for a moment, and I don't know whether this is your area of sort of speciality or not, but with the research that you've done in terms of kind of some of the chemicals for weight loss, have you done anything in terms of, I guess from what I've read, there's so much there's a certain amount of fat that you can store. Your body's good at storing fat for a period of time, going back into our sort of how we evolved as humans. But with sugar, you're only able to sort of, or glucose, you're only able to kind of like store that and utilize that, even though that's quite an important substance. So is there anything in there, when you talk about this sort of ketogenic diet and how it helps you think clearer and I suppose gets you to use fat for fuel? Is that something that you've really gone into and understood, or is that, I don't want to take you out of your area of, your field of expertise, but I just wondered if it's anything you know too much about.
I read a lot about what the experts are saying on this because there's been a lot of controversy in this space. There is the ongoing carbohydrate insulin model of obesity versus the just, I guess you would just call it the calories in, calories out model, which gets a lot of people very upset. And so Kevin Hall is one of the researchers that's doing a lot of work there, but Gary Torbs and Kevin Hall like to spar quite often, and David Ludwig and a bunch of others. They're the experts. And I am just literally listening and reading the results of their work. At this stage, I still would say from everything all the studies that have been done so far, it looks as though in terms of how much weight you're going to lose, if you eat the same amount of calories, and I'm going to refer to that as carbon atoms in a minute, but if you're eating the same amount, then it doesn't really matter. And that this becomes really obvious and clear if you stop thinking about calories, which there's nothing wrong with them, but if you start thinking about the carbon atoms and the oxygen and hydrogen atoms that food is made of, and particularly the carbon atoms, because it all just comes down to your weight is the sum total of all the atoms in your body. Most of them are parts of water molecules because you're 60% water, but the rest of you, the 40% or 35% that is not water, that's carbon atoms with hydrogen and oxygen stuck to them. Fat molecules are literally nothing but carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And so ultimately, all this controversy that is going on is very interesting to me, but I think it really confuses the heck out of the average person who just wants to lose some weight and doesn't really give a toss about, the nitty-gritty, itty-bitty details, which are second-order effects anyway. If one of the two diets is going to be better than the other, I'll 100% commit to this comment that it's going to be a second-order effect. Like it's not going to be the main issue in terms of how much weight you lose, whether you went on keto or a carbohydrate including diet. The difference is tiny compared to the amount of weight that you want to lose. The signal to noise ratio is crap. It just doesn't matter. But how you will feel will be particularly could be very different. And so maybe the low carb diet is for some people and not for others, and that's really interesting.
Right. So I'll come on to the carbon conversation in a minute then. So there's a couple of more myths that I wanted to just cover. One of the one is in terms of you call it moving your atoms, but what you do say is, look, you don't need to work out to lose weight. And even there's an example in your book about how an hour of jogging, which is pretty tough, it's quite a long time, doesn't have as much of an impact in that as probably what you imagine. So tell us a little bit about that myth and sort of how you came about sort of making that one.
Right. I can't explain this without going down the atom path, because it's impossible, because it is just all about atoms. So I'm going to have to refer to the fact that when you inhale air, you are inhaling, let's call it 80% nitrogen, which just goes in and out of your lungs, and 20% oxygen. And there's a tiny, tiny bit of carbon dioxide in the air, 0.04%, it's, what is that, 4 in 10,000 atoms or something like that, molecules. But the point is, you are breathing in oxygen and nitrogen. When you exhale, you breathe out carbon dioxide, and everyone knows that. What we don't tend to think about is that the carbon that's coming out of you when you exhale has mass, and it makes your exhaled breath heavier than your inhaled breath every single time, because oxygen goes in, 2 atoms, O2, 2 oxygen atoms stuck together, and you breathe out carbon dioxide, which is CO2. So there's still 2 oxygen atoms there, but now there's a third carbon atom wedged in between these 2 oxygen atoms. So if more atoms are coming out of you than what you are sucking in, then you've got to be losing weight. So the point about whether or not you need to do exercise in order to lose weight is, again, let's separate being healthy from just losing mass, because to stay healthy, you must exercise. It's a well-known fact. If you're not doing exercise at least once a day, I think you're crazy, because it's the number one way to stay healthy, as well as obviously eating well and not smoking and not drinking. But if you're not exercising, that's as bad as smoking or drinking in some ways, like it's just so good for you. Why are you not doing it? So please don't think that I'm saying you shouldn't exercise. However, if you can't exercise because you are in a coma and, the doctors have got you hooked up to a ventilator, if you ever go into the ICU ward, and I've done a seminar for the ICU nurses at the Bundaberg Base Hospital, because they hadn't really connected the dots that when you have a patient on a ventilator, you're pumping oxygen into them and you're pulling carbon dioxide out of them. Those carbon atoms that they're losing, they are heavy, and so the patient is losing weight the whole time that you are breathing for them. They're losing weight. So what's the other thing we have to do for ICU patients? Hang a bag of parenteral nutrition up on their patient hanger and inject it into their bloodstream, because if you do not put the food back in, a patient in a coma loses weight. In fact, on average, I think I do quote the number in the book. There's been studies on what's the average amount of weight loss for comatose patients in the first month, and it's up to like 20% of their body weight they lose because they can't. Well, I don't know why they're not pumping enough carbon atoms back in. So I haven't. I'm not an expert on parenteral nutrition, but it's a well-known fact that you can be in a coma, not exercising and losing weight. Therefore, we know that exercise is not the only thing that causes weight loss.
Right. Okay. So I've got another one here, and I know I'm trying to sort of like hold back on the sort of the next part, but I think you'll probably be able to do this as well. Like one of the things that most people think is that when you're working out or moving, that you're actually burning your fat and converting that into energy. And so like, if you want to, and I guess, even a number of fitness clubs and workout programs are called burn. And it's like, let's burn your fat and it's going to kind of evaporate and turn into energy. What you're saying is, look, that's totally wrong. Is that right?
Yes. That's true. It is 100% wrong to say that you are turning your fat into energy. And this is not news. Like this little fact was discovered by Antoine Lavoisier back in the 1770s. So around, In Australia, I remind people that Captain Cook sailed into Botany Bay of Australia in 1770. Over in America, I'd say, Independence Day, what's that, 1774, we did not know in that beginning of that decade what actually happens when someone's losing weight. But by the end of it, Antoine Lavoisier had figured out that actually what's going on is we inhale oxygen, we combine it with the carbon atoms that come from food, and sometimes we store those carbon atoms so they might end up in your fat cells, but they still came from food. We react the oxygen that we breathe with the carbon and hydrogen atoms in food, and we convert all that into carbon dioxide, which we exhale, and a bit of water. You cannot take atoms and turn them into energy. So you can't take fats made out of the average fat molecules, got 55 carbon atoms, 104 oxygens, 104 hydrogens and 6 oxygens, a lot of atoms. None of those atoms get turned into energy when you lose weight. The carbon all comes out of your lungs, the hydrogen all becomes water, and the oxygen does a bit of each. So to say that when you're losing weight or you're burning your fat, you're not turning it into energy, you're turning it into carbon dioxide and water. It is correct to call that burning, though. And right. Antoine Lavoisier was famously said that respiration is a combustion. It's just that it happens inside of us. So we don't think of it in the same way we think of combustion of a piece of wood or a piece of coal or some gasoline in a car. We forget that that's similar, very, very similar chemistry, almost identical, is happening inside of our bodies in a very controlled way. It's happening without the flames because it's happening in a watery solution. But the chemistry, the end result, and the energy release is basically identical in many ways. We are combusting our food and breathing out the waste products, the exhaust.
Right. And then the final thing I just picked up on the Myths book, which I think is, some people are probably in this position, but you say that, it's not true that some people can't lose weight. Like, everybody can. And I think you give some quite interesting examples, but is that right as well? Nobody can make the excuse of, look, I can't lose weight.
Right. So again, this is touchy topic, sort of dangerous ground stuff, because if you invoke the words willpower, you'll have a screaming mob at your door. So I don't want to say that psychologically there are reasons that people find it very hard to stop eating or to not overeat, and physiologically as well, like the hunger cues and the appetite, which is Kevin Hall is doing great work on this, but so are, like, literally, apologies to the thousands of other people I haven't mentioned that are doing great work in this field. Your appetite is super complicated. We know there's at least 26 hormones and peptides that pull on the appetite tug of war inside your brain. So I don't want to say that, and it's not true that some people find it extremely difficult to not overeat, but there is no human alive who, if they stop eating carbon atoms or eat less of them than they breathe out, there's no human that won't lose weight. There are a couple of diseases like lipodemia, which is a terrible affliction that where people store fat and they can no longer, for very mysterious biochemical reasons, they can't get the fat back out of their fat cells. So, for people with those sorts of conditions, they can't get rid of the weight because they have a genetic issue going on. So I'm referring to people who, well, let me take a step back there. For the people with lipodemia, if they eat less carbon atoms than they breathe out, they will still end up losing some weight, but it's very hard for them to budge the fat from certain parts of their body. It's really complicated when you get down to the level of what's going in and out of fat cells. But if you just zoom out and remember that every time you inhale, you've breathed in oxygen, but when you exhale, you're breathing out some carbon as well as oxygen. Therefore, your body is always losing a bit of mass. And like, it's not like this is news, you know. If you look up the early research done by NASA and probably the Russians as well on putting humans into space, they went and figured out precisely, exactly how much stuff comes out of a person through their bladder, through their rectum, through their lungs and their skin. And it's all being published in NASA technical reports. We know how much carbon a human loses through their lungs every day. Submariners in submarines studied it even earlier, because the problem with exhaled carbon dioxide, which we don't often think about because we're not often in a confined space, but if you lock yourself into an airtight container that's not very big and you just sit in there and breathe, very quickly the carbon dioxide levels go up and up and up and up. And once they get to a few percent, you're going to start to feel very dizzy, and you'll die if you don't get out into fresh air, because not only are you consuming the oxygen in there, you're poisoning the air with carbon dioxide, which, you know, a little bit's not poison, but when carbon dioxide levels get up to 5%, you're starting to get into really big trouble.
Right.
So we're always losing carbon, we're always losing weight, 24 hours a day.
So look, the big question, and I'll get people to quickly think of this as I ask it. So then there's a really cool little YouTube thing that you do where you ask a few people this question. To be honest, I didn't have the correct answer when you said it. Is so, you know, how do you really lose weight, and where does that weight go? And for the listeners, I'd just sort of like, you know, spend a few seconds, write down what quickly comes into your mind. But yeah, it threw me. It wasn't what I thought was obvious. I'd imagine if it was, there'd be sort of slightly even different machines that some wacky people would create to try and sort of like, you know, accelerate that process mistakenly. But come on, tell us then, Ruben, you know, how do you really lose weight, and where does the weight go that you're losing?
Yeah, and I'll preempt as well to say I did not know the answer to this question when I was 42, because I'd never even thought of it. And then by the time I was 43, I had read all the biochemistry books, and it's well-known fact, but we just don't teach it very well. So the answer is, when you're losing weight, the weight that you're losing, fat, is made out of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and only those three elements. So that's element number 1, element number 6, and element number 8 on the periodic table for the nerds out there. And when you are losing the weight, you are converting this substance called fat into carbon dioxide and water, and all of the carbon dioxide you breathe out and all of the water comes out of you. Either it can come out as sweat, urine, tears. So the thing that I thought that was the most fascinating fact of all, if I'm losing weight, I'm turning it into carbon dioxide and water. The next question that I had, being a physics nerd, was, if I'm losing it in these two ways, carbon dioxide and water, how much of the weight that I lose do I exhale, and how much of that weight becomes water, which I can lose in all those other ways? And this number knocked me for six. The fact that when you lose 10 kilograms or 10 pounds, or 10, whatever units of measure you like, if you're losing 10 kilograms, 8.4 of them you exhale as carbon dioxide, and the 1.6 kilograms remaining that becomes water, which is 1.5, bit over 1.5 liters of water. It's a lot of water. All of that water ends up in your body water, mixed with your, you know, all the water that you drink. We call it metabolic water. It's water that you made out of atoms that you inhaled, oxygen, and hydrogen atoms that you ate. You marry those up in, it's called the electron transport chain, this part of the metabolism or the metabolic pathway. But you're making fresh water molecules out of what was oxygen in the air and what was hydrogen in your food, and you make 1.6 liters out of that water when you lose 10 kilograms of weight, which is, again, just wonderful stuff to know. I don't know that it helps anyone particularly. It's just it's just such cool stuff.
So on that, when I was doing some research, I came up against, there's some people that sort of got different views. There was a guy, you've probably seen it, a guy called Dr. Ekberg, and he was, I don't know if you saw his video, but he was he was more coming from the biology side, and he said that there's a difference in physics than in biology in terms of how the body works. And I'm not trying to sort of trick you up or put you on the spot, but it was just interested to see your thought, because he was kind of saying, well, look, the energy in, energy out makes a lot of sense. But he was sort of saying that in the human body, it's affected by hormones, which can change certain responses, and insulin has a big impact. So what's your views on that? Do you think, and you must have spent a lot of time studying all kinds of areas on this, but would you agree or disagree with that in terms of how the biology of the body and the hormone response to certain things and chemicals and how it's stored, etc., could change the effect of what you're describing there?
Yeah, so I actually haven't watched Dr. Ekberg's video, but I perhaps I should. So it's very true that when you eat food, there are metabolic responses and hormones. And I don't know if Dr. Ekberg is a endocrinologist, hopefully, because they're the people that you really want to talk to about the hormone responses, like your insulin response and your thyroid hormones. Those all those hormone responses are, yes, they are well known, not all well understood, but I think you're overcomplicating it if you're invoking all that stuff. Just zoom out and measure, literally, which is what they do in the ICU ward. They do this in paramedics, measure how much carbon dioxide you exhale. The word for it is capnometry. Capnometry just means measuring the amount of carbon dioxide in your breath. If there's more carbon dioxide than the average person breathes out in your breath, then you are hypercapnic. That'll happen if you just sit there and hold your breath. Yet the amount of CO2 in your exhale breath goes up. If you hyperventilate, the amount of CO2 in your breath comes down, and it's then you're hypocapnic. So just zoom out. If you're getting all confused about, but inside my body there's hormones and I'm very complicated, and yes, that's really true. But if you just measure how much oxygen's going into your lungs and how much carbon dioxide's coming out, you'll discover that you are always losing weight. And yes, you might be in ketoacidosis in an ambulance being rushed to hospital because you're about to die from your insulin response, but you're still breathing out carbon dioxide, I betcha. And just speak to any paramedic about this. I am, and also anaesthetists, because when an anaesthetist has someone completely anaesthetized, the gold standard these days in monitoring your patient and making sure that they're alive and well and everything's working is not just to look at their oxygen levels in their blood, but it's to make sure that they're exhaling the right amount of carbon dioxide. And there is so much information in capnography, which is looking at the graph of how much CO2 is rushing past your lips. So just think about this for a second. When you inhale, there is almost no carbon dioxide passing your lips. It's all, the air's going in, and there's only whatever carbon dioxide's in the air, 0.04%. When you start breathing out, the amount of carbon dioxide in the air rushing past your lips goes from nothing to whoompa, up to about 4%. And then it starts to level off as you keep exhaling and you're breathing out air that was more deeply inside of your lungs. And then when you stop exhaling and you breathe in again, the amount of CO2 rushing past your lips goes straight back down to zero. And so the capnogram, when a paramedic arrives at an accident scene and there is a patient there who has stopped breathing, when the paramedics intubate the patient because they have damage to their airways, the gold standard for monitoring the patient is to intubate the patient and then watch how much carbon dioxide is rushing past their lips. If there is no carbon dioxide coming out when the person exhales, that's called a medical emergency. The paramedic has either accidentally put the tube into the esophagus of the patient, which leads to the stomach, instead of the trachea, which leads to the lungs. So, they would check that they've correctly positioned the tube. If the tube is correctly positioned and there's still no carbon dioxide coming out of a person's lungs, then the explanation is that their lungs are not getting blood supply from their heart. And that's, again, a medical emergency. There's no perfusion of the lungs. So, for people who are zooming in, like Dr. Ekberg and anyone else, who are worried about insulin, which we should, like, I'm not saying don't consider these things, but if we're just talking about weight loss, you've zoomed in too far. Come back. Just look at the amount of CO2 leaving a person's lungs. The answers are all in the carbon dioxide.
Right. So one of the things I was thinking about after that, and I guess others are thinking the same thing. So it's okay. So it's all in what you breathe out, essentially, if we simplify it. So is there a way that you can accelerate that, where you can actually, so you can get rid of more carbon dioxide or burn more to kind of accelerate that process at all?
Yeah. So that is frequently asked question number one. And, when I give talks about this, and I've done literally, am I into the hundreds? Yes, I might be into the thousands. I visit schools and talk about this, and I have spoken at the Dubai Health Forum, and I've spoken at teacher conferences and health conferences. And whenever I'm telling the story about the fact that you lose weight through your lungs, I'll invariably see someone in the audience nudging their neighbor and making the joke, "Hey, look at me, I'm losing weight." And they all giggle, and it is funny. But the point of that is no, that they are breathing out carbon dioxide more rapidly than normal, but they're hyperventilating. And if you do that and you look at the capnogram of a person who is hyperventilating, what you'll see is they're breathing out more carbon dioxide than their body is producing. So again, if we zoom out for a second and you look at a human who's sitting still, then the amount of carbon dioxide that they are consuming is very closely related to the amount of oxygen they're consuming. So they consume oxygen, they produce carbon dioxide. How much carbon dioxide you produce compared to how much oxygen you consume is called your respiratory quotient, RQ. And so if you're burning pure carbohydrates in all of your cells, then for every 100 milliliters of oxygen you consume, you'll produce 100 milliliters of carbon dioxide, which fascinatingly, if you are burning fat and just fat and no carbs, then for every 100 milliliters of oxygen you consume, you would only produce 70 milliliters of carbon dioxide. So that's an interesting bit of biochemistry there and some physics. But if you breathe more carbon dioxide out than your body's producing, then it goes it's obvious that there will then be less carbon dioxide than there is normally in your body. It's a state called hypocapnia, whereas there's not enough CO2 in your blood. And the very interesting thing about carbon dioxide in your blood, or whenever you mix carbon dioxide with water, your listeners already know this, it makes an acid. They might not have said those words, but when you drink carbonated water, the reason it stings in your sinuses and at the back of your throat is that the carbon dioxide that is coming out of solution, all those bubbles, when that pops inside your face and it fills your nasal cavities with almost pure carbon dioxide reacts with water and it forms carbonic acid, which irritates your mucous membranes, and your eyes water as a result. You don't notice it when you're breathing because there's not enough CO2 in your blood compared to when you're sculling a carbonated beverage. So if you're breathing out more carbon dioxide than your body's producing, you're losing carbon dioxide, and the acidity or the pH of your blood decreases. Or another way to say the same thing is the alkalinity of your blood increases. Your blood becomes more alkaline. That's actually the thing that your brain notices that tells your system to take breaths when you're not thinking about it. It's the CO2.
Is that a good thing though? I thought if you're fairly alkaline, in terms of certain diseases, that's a positive thing. Is that right?
Well, there is the alkalizing diet, and again, controversial because there's not really any evidence that by eating certain foods you alkalize your body. The number one control over how acidic your blood is how much carbon dioxide is in your bloodstream, and it is super exquisitely controlled by the fact that you have a thing called the buffer system in your blood, the bicarbonate buffer. Complicated chemistry to explain in words, easy to show with some simple animations. Very hard to say in words because it's hard to follow these little atoms around in your mind's eye. But when you exhale too much and you breathe out more air than you need to breathe out and your blood becomes alkaline, you might think that that's good. Actually, it's bad. And the people that you need to start reading books about if you're interested in this stuff there's a great book by James Nestor called Breath, which is all about breathing and carbon dioxide levels. Patrick McKeown has written a whole bunch of great books, and he's probably one of the world's leading authors on the effect of carbon dioxide on your state of mind. You can become quite anxious if you hyperventilate. So your blood needs to be 7.3-ish on the pH scale. If you hold your breath, it'll start rising very quickly, like almost instantly. And if you, it starts increasing if you, you can see it's so difficult without graphs in front of you. If you hold your breath, you're not getting rid of the CO2. It'll build up and you become more acid. If you hyperventilate, you do get rid of the CO2 and you become alkaline. Neither of those things will help you lose weight, though.
Are any of those things good for you? Like if you were to, breathe and you were more alkaline, or you were more, or is it a case of just don't worry about that? You just
No, definitely. There are very serious consequences for hyperventilating. There's the hyperventilation syndrome, it's called, and that's very worth reading up on. But to understand it, to really deeply get the reasoning, why do people become anxious when they hyperventilate, blow off too much CO2? The physiology and the chemistry of that is very complex. It's reasonably well understood. Patrick McKeown talks about it a lot, and James Nestor's book covers it as well. And lots of breath coaches know about it. Is it good for you? No, it's not good. It's not good to be hypocapnic, and it's not good to be hypercapnic. You need to be normocapnic. And that means your blood pH will be at around the 7.334 mark. So your body's exquisitely well controlled, and it's controlled not by you consciously, but by a whole bunch of systems. Your kidneys can excrete bicarbonate if there's too much of them. You can breathe more to get rid of carbon dioxide if there's too much of it. None of these things will really help you to lose weight, but they're definitely interesting to know.
And what about if you have carbonated drinks and waters, beers, champagne, soft drinks? Like, is it good to drink carbonated? Is it bad to drink carbonated? What is that sort of, by obviously you want to get rid of carbon, because it's not a good thing, but how does the drinking it play a part?
I get asked that question quite a lot, actually. Of some people, in fact, there was a paper published in the postgraduate medical journal by a doctor who had the hypothesis that people who are obese, or people with obesity, have trouble exhaling all the CO2 they produce. Now, that's not correct. I shot the hypothesis down in an editorial, and I felt terrible because this doctor's such a nice human being. But the thing about carbon dioxide and turning it into fat is that carbon dioxide is one carbon atom with two hydrogen atoms stuck to it, and the only organisms on planet Earth that can take that one carbon atom and turn it into glucose, and then it can turn the glucose into fats like olive oil and so forth. But the only organisms that can do that are photosynthetic organisms. So we humans can't take the carbon dioxide in air or in the beverages that we drink and glue those carbon atoms together to make bigger molecules. And the reason we can't do it is because you need energy to rip the atoms apart and stick them back together again. And there's a net cost of energy in doing that. It's called photosynthesis. The energy that photosynthetic organisms use to do it comes from sunlight, and they use an enzyme called chlorophyll to make it all happen. Now, humans, we do not produce chlorophyll anywhere in our body, and so we are unable to turn lots of carbon dioxide into fat. The carbon atoms in carbon dioxide get swapped around between water and it goes into carbonic acid. There's amazing motion of these little atoms, but when you zoom out and look at a human and how many atoms go in and out, the carbon dioxide atoms that you swallow in a drink, you cannot turn those into glucose or fat. So what happens to them? They are absorbed into your bloodstream, just like in your stomach, because carbon dioxide can go through cell membranes quite easily. So it rapidly goes through the membranes of your stomach into your bloodstream. It'll end up in your lungs and you'll breathe it out, just like the carbon dioxide that you're making in your cells. So there's nothing wrong with carbonated drinks. I have a soda stream. I love carbonated water. But it's such a common question. It won't make you fat.
So it doesn't sort of restrict, like when you said there's only so much carbon dioxide that you can exhale, it doesn't take up a portion of your allowance of exhalation carbonation.
No, that's a really good question, because it's not obvious. So no, in fact, going back to the emergency rooms and hospitals, one of the things that doctors sometimes do on purpose, and I can't tell you all the reasons they do this, but they sometimes inject sodium bicarbonate, baking soda, into a person's blood. They infuse it into them in a solution, and that is an attempt to put more carbon dioxide in the person to get their carbon dioxide levels up as opposed to going down. If there's more carbon dioxide in your blood than there should be, the result of that will be the pH of your blood will become more acidic. That will cause you to breathe more. You'll literally just breathe more, like you do when you're running. So that's a really great example, actually. There's two reasons that you breathe more air when you are exercising. One of the reasons is you need more oxygen because you're consuming more energy, so you're burning more food. But the other reason you need to breathe more when you are exercising is because you're also producing more carbon dioxide, more fumes, and so you have to get rid of those, because if you don't, they build up inside your body. Just like if you get a big potato and you whack it on the end of a car exhaust, don't do this. But if you do, the car can't get rid of its exhaust fumes, carbon dioxide, and that thing will blow out, or the car just won't start. And for humans, if you can't get rid of your CO2, you'll pass out in no time because you'll become super hypercapnic. So no, it's not like you're taking up valuable carbon dioxide cargo space. You can just breathe more.
Right. And what is it's just coming to my mind, but so with a lot of people wearing masks now, I'm sure you've been asked this question as well before, but does that sort of have any impact on not necessarily just losing weight, but that's an interesting question, but does it have any impact on you being able to get rid of that carbon dioxide? Does it kind of hang around a little bit more than normal? What's your experience on that?
Yeah, that's I've been asked that question a lot since the pandemic, and so again, it's a good question because clearly we're not being taught this stuff very well at school. If we don't know the answers already, because this is like 101 sort of stuff. We should be learning this. We should be learning it in elementary school. And so the answer on the masks is if you look at the volume of air in a standard average breath, it's around 300, 400 milliliters. I'm sorry, I don't know fluid ounces so well, but you know, a can of soft drink, soda pop, is around an average breath. So, you know, just about that much a can's worth. So the amount of air that you can trap in between a mask and your skin is less than probably 50 milliliters. So when you breathe out, you blow all that air that was there, it's gone. And then when you suck new air in, the tiny little 50 milliliters that was inside this mask space, you overwhelm that with the air you're sucking in, because you just, the ratio of the air that's trapped there. But let me explain it a different way, because it touches on what we call physiological dead space. So between your mouth and your lungs, and the alveoli of your lungs, so where the gas exchange is happening is not here in your trachea. It's not in your bronchi. It's all the way down. You go through many branches in the airways until you get to these little tiny sacs in your lungs called alveoli. And it's only in the alveoli where oxygen can pop into your blood and onto hemoglobin, and carbon dioxide pops out of your blood and into the airspace, so you can then eject it when you breathe out again. Now, the space between your lips and where the alveoli start is called your anatomical, physiological dead space. It's all the parts of your airways where there's no gas exchange, and it's roughly, it's around 100 milliliters for the average adult. And so if you only take breaths that are like literally 200 milliliters, then half of the air that you suck in never even makes it to your alveoli. It just washes backwards and forwards in that dead space. So that's not very efficient breathing. Whereas if you take a big deep breath and, you know, you've sucked in a couple of liters of air, then that's much more than that tiny bit of dead space. And when I was talking about the capnogram earlier, when, you know, if you watch how much CO2 is going past a person's lips, and that's precisely what doctors do. They watch it with a detector, an infrared light and an infrared detector shining across the tube that's coming out of a patient. If you shine light through that, the CO2 absorbs the infrared light that's being emitted, and so the detector detects less when there's CO2 coming out of your breath. That's how it works. And if you watch that, as a person starts their exhale, you go from having no carbon dioxide going past their lips to very quickly it rises in a very steep angle until you get to, I don't know, 3.5–4% carbon dioxide in the air that's rushing past the lips. And then it's sort of the rate of increase slows down a little bit, but it still increases as a person keeps breathing out. The longer you keep breathing out, the deeper the air is coming from within your lungs. Like as you take a bigger breath, you're clearing out deeper part of your lungs, and there's higher concentration of CO2 then rushing past your lips until you stop exhaling and you breathe in again, at which point air's going that way, no carbon dioxide, the little detector sees nothing. That's capnography. And I think capnography is the one thing that if you understand it, then you understand weight loss, because it's where the carbon atoms go that you eat. I should very quickly explain that what's in urine, because we didn't touch on what comes out of your bladder, which is extremely important. What comes out of your bladder is the nitrogen part of protein. So protein's made out of amino acids. I think most of your listeners will know there's 20 of them, 21. 9 of them are essential. You can't make them, you have to eat them. Amino acids are joined together in big long strands to make proteins, which curl up into all sorts of shapes, but they're just made out of these 21 amino acids. All amino acids, when you burn them, when you mix them with oxygen and convert them into carbon dioxide and water, is the main 2 waste products. But you also get, from burning protein, you get a little bit of nitrogen in there, which we turn into urea. And the urea comes out of our urine. So that's the number one solid component of urine solids is the urea that you produce. And then there's a whole bunch, there's more than 100 other molecules that have a nitrogen atom in them, like creatinine and creatine and uric acid. And there's all these other nitrogen-based molecules in your urine, tiny bit of ammonia, but it's mostly urea. And if you track how many atoms you eat and where they all go, 75% of the weight of all the food you eat comes back out of you as carbon dioxide. About 20-something% becomes water, and just the tiniest bit becomes urea and a little bit of sulfate and a little bit of phosphate that you pee out. And the phosphorus atoms, I mean, everyone knows about phosphates in fitness land because we all know about ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate. Those phosphate molecules, when you burn them and lose them eventually, they come out of your bladder. And it's one of the most important molecules in your body. And we don't often think about what happens to it. You pee it out when you lose it. It's down the toilet.
I saw you had these little molecule models for kids that you were doing, and there's a really interesting video because I'd never really thought of these molecules and what they look like and how many sort of circles and connectors they had. But I can't remember the exact video, but it was quite interesting when you showed, like, I think it was fats and glucose. There was a couple of things that we eat, but they when you look at them as molecules, they all seem to kind of originate from the same thing. Although it wasn't, you didn't necessarily point it out, but I was quite fascinated that the similarity between a lot of these different food sources, which kind of, the way you're explaining it is, look, it's not that complicated. You breathe certain things in and you breathe this out. There's only so many. There's a certain amount of molecules, but when you actually look at what they look like visually, you kind of think, well, that's the same as that one. There's a tiny little thing that's different, and they only seem to be very, very slightly one step away from the previous one, which that kind of really blew my mind, to be honest.
Me too, because I'm a physicist by training. I didn't do chemistry even in high school. It bored me senseless the way it was taught. I look back at my chemistry and think, wow, how did they make something so interesting so dull and boring? And I've since discovered it's not the teacher's faults. And so one of the things I'm advocating for now is that we teach it in primary school, because actually if you've got these models that you're talking about, I've got them here, and it's not much use showing you stuff if people are listening on a podcast, but they're called sticky atoms.
Well, we do it. This is on YouTube as well, so you can kind of show it. Yeah.
Well, look, these are invented by a retired teacher here in Brisbane, whose name is Ian Stewart, who he's my hero, because he's made it possible to teach kindergarten children what H2O means. H2O stands for the fact that you've got the white little plastic balls that I've got in my hands here. They represent hydrogen atoms, and the red ones represent oxygen atoms. And the reason we make them red and white is a convention that goes back to the 1950s. Some scientists invented the idea of making atoms into models, and they had to pick some colors, and they chose red for oxygen because it's associated with fire. They picked white for hydrogen. To make H2O, water, if you take some hydrogen gas, which is highly flammable, and you mix it with oxygen gas, which, I've got hydrogen molecules here, just little white balls that stick together with magnets. But you can show kids that when you react hydrogen gas, the white ones, with oxygen gas, they come apart, the atoms all split and regroup to become, instead of 2 hydrogen molecules and 1 oxygen molecule, I end up with 2 water molecules. So when you're burning hydrogen, you're literally turning 2 gases into water. Now, we can take that to the next level and show kids what food is made of. A glucose molecule is 6 of these carbon atoms, which we color black. And the reason we color carbon atoms black is because coal is made of carbon. And so the carbon and coal.
And carbohydrates, which I didn't realize you told me about, came from carbon.
Right. Yeah, when I went down to Bondi Beach and did that video you mentioned, I went down to the beach and just asked just passers-by if they knew where the carbon in your breath comes from when you exhale, and none of them knew where the carbon atoms in exhaled carbon dioxide come from. And the clue I kept giving them was, have you heard of carbohydrates? And I do this with children all the time. In fact, it's super cute watching 200 grade 1, so 5, 6, 7-year-old kids. If you say to them, what are you breathing in? They all yell out, oxygen, because they know, they pick it up from who knows where. And then they all know they breathe out carbon dioxide. They know the words. But if you say, where does the carbon come from? Just like the adults, no idea. And the clue, carbohydrates, I'll say to kids, what do you think the carbo stands for? And they all say, oh, carbon. Yes. And what does it mean if you're dehydrated? When you are dehydrated, you need to, and they all say, drink water. And then I ask, like literally 7-year-olds, I'll say, and what's the chemical formula for water? And they'll say, H2O. But if you dig a little deeper, they don't know what H2O means. So to have these sticky atoms, which, they're a pretty recent invention. And whenever I show these to preschool teachers, they all look at them and say, oh, wow, yeah, I could definitely teach my preschool children what H2O means. And people do all over the world now, thanks to Ian Stewart and his sticky atoms. But how great for adults too, because I didn't know this stuff. I'm a physicist. My job used to be making lasers. It's got nothing to do with biochemistry, but just having sticky atoms really, it makes it tangible. It makes it seem real as opposed to this invisible stuff.
And it also makes you realize how, like, if when you break things down to kind of a really, really small level, like how everything's kind of made up and how similar things are, and like carbon, what carbon's in, and we breathe it and we eat it, and it's in plants, and it's weird how you start to sort of see how the sort of universe
yes
kind of comes together in a how connected the universe is in a funny way.
Oh, look, I couldn't agree more. And I'm no hippie, and my feet are really firmly planted on the ground. But this is the circle of life we're talking about, because what happens on planet Earth every single day, as soon as the sun comes up, plants they use sunlight. I'll show you what I actually do for children. I put on a green glove for this because if you can make things as visual as possible, then kids are more likely to understand, or adults as well. So I got my mother to make me this green glove out of cotton. She sewed it up, knitted it for me. And this glove is going to play the part of chlorophyll. And I'll show you what I mean by the circle of life, because you've got plants on planet Earth sitting in sunlight all day. What they're really doing is they pull the water that falls out of the sky into the soil and down into their roots. They pull that up into their leaf and hold it right near chlorophyll, with chlorophyll. And when chlorophyll is holding onto water, a ray of sunlight that gets absorbed by the chlorophyll molecules, that ray of sunshine, the energy is enough to break the bond that's holding the oxygen atoms to the water molecule. And so you need 2 photons of sunlight to break these 2 bonds in this water molecule. And now I've ripped off both of the hydrogen atoms from this one oxygen molecule. And we need a second water molecule to sort of complete this trick. So a second water molecule comes up, more sunlight hits this bond here on this side of the molecule, and another photon breaks this bond here. The plant keeps all of that hydrogen, all those hydrogen atoms, but these 2 oxygen atoms that it got from water, that's waste products for plants. They don't want this oxygen, so they release this oxygen through the little holes in the bottom of the leaf. They're called stomata. The oxygen from the water molecules comes out of those holes, and you and I breathe it. So that's beautiful fact number 1. And when I'm doing this for kids, I then take off the glove, because for the next chemical reactions that happen in the sequence towards making food, the plants don't need sunlight for the rest of this story. So the next thing the plant will do is, through this exact same little holes in the bottom of the leaf, plants can pull in carbon dioxide. So it's a two-way street, that little hole. There's oxygen coming out and there's carbon dioxide going in. And I've just prepared a carbon dioxide molecule here. So 2 oxygen atoms stuck to 1 carbon atom. The next step in making food is the plant takes the hydrogen atoms it stole from water molecules and it rips these carbon dioxide molecules apart a bit and sticks the hydrogens to the carbon dioxide molecule. And while I'm doing that, what am I doing here? I'm making a carbo. I'm hydrating it with water. So I'm making a carbohydrate. And that is where the word carbohydrate comes from. It was invented from that exact phenomenon. And if I do it 5 more times, I'll have 6 carbon atoms and I can build up a ring of glucose. And plants they also make fructose, and all green plants stick the glucose to the fructose, which makes sucrose, sugar, which everyone freaks out about. Don't have too much, but it's like definitely not poison. That sugar that the plant makes inside their leaves, that sugar is very water soluble. They put it into their sap, and the sap takes it down to every other part of the tree where those atoms can be used to build leaves, to build tree trunks, bark, roots. And you'll see insects that go and inject their fangs into a plant and suck that sap out, because that sap's got carbohydrates in it, which the plant's making. So they're stealing the plant's food. And we then eat it all and do the exact opposite. We turn glucose back into carbon dioxide and water, and we breathe out the carbon dioxide, and that is the circle of life. We've gone around back to carbon dioxide and water. And if I was a hippie, I'd get that tattooed on my chest, because it's just wonderful, wonderful stuff.
Yeah, mind-blowing. So Ruben, if people want to find out more about you, book you for speaking, whatever, what's the best place for people to find and connect with you?
Come to my website, rubenmeerman.com. I am literally in the process of building a carbon calculator, which will calculate for you how much carbon you are eating in all the food you eat and how much carbon dioxide you exhale. So it'll calculate your VO2, your VCO2, and then it'll calculate how much does the carbon in your exhaled carbon dioxide weigh, and how much, therefore, are you losing by simply breathing. And then on top of that, the calculator, you can tell it, well, here's what I did today. There's a 24-hour activity log. And you can tell it, I went for a run, I did some cooking, I sat still and watched TV, I slept for this many hours. It'll tell you precisely how much carbon did you exhale on this particular day. You can tell it what you ate, and it'll tell you how much carbon you ate, and it'll balance those two and tell you, did you eat more carbon than you ate today, or did you eat less? If it was more, sorry, you didn't lose weight today, or maybe you're wanting to gain some weight. That's equally valid, but this calculator will tell you your carbon balance. So that's at rubenmeerman.com. And by the way, I'll put, that's all sitting behind a little paywall, but I'll put 50 vouchers, coupons on, so that if you just type in, the coupon code is escape your limits, and there's 50 of them there. So just jump on and have a go. It's so interesting watching. It graphs what your metabolic rate is for 24 hours. So when you're sitting still, the rate at which you breathe out carbon dioxide just stays pretty level. So if all you do is sit there and watch TV and have a nap and don't do much, the CO2 coming out of your lungs comes out at a very steady pace. So there's this very flat line. If you stand up and go for a walk, it quadruples. You're breathing out 4 times more CO2 than when you were sitting still, if you're walking at a reasonable pace. And on your graph, you'll see, bang, it goes up. If you then also look at the graph of how much CO2, if we track from midnight to midnight, how much carbon did I breathe out? Starting at midnight, you're slowly puffing it out while you're asleep. You breathe out about 20% of the carbon that you exhale in your lifetime comes out while you're unconscious, sleeping. And so it'll tick along until you get up and start doing things. So you get up and have a shower. You are immediately breathing 2.5 times more air when you stand up and start showering, because your muscles in your legs, they're huge. They're the biggest muscles in your body. So you start using them, you start breathing more because you need more energy. So you need more oxygen, you produce more CO2. You start combing your hair. These are the second biggest groups of muscles in your body. So just by standing there combing your hair and washing it, you're sucking in and out 2.5 times more air. And all of that is reflected in this activity log. And I've been playing with it for a couple of weeks. And for someone who knew, it's also obvious, but just seeing the graph, I'm like, oh man, that really just hammers it home. So yeah,
we'll put the link in. We'll put the link in there on YouTube and everywhere. So send it after us, and we'll hook that up as well.
I will.
So look,
sorry, and I was going to say, look, speaking is the other thing. I, as you can probably tell, I just chat my head off. But if people are keen to have me on as a speaker or a guest, come to the website, and there's a link through to the agents that look after my speaking and so forth. And I also love working with school kids. If there's any teachers out there who want to learn how you can start to teach your school kids as young as 5 that the food they eat comes back out of their lungs, get in touch. There's great research that I can send you. There's some great evidence-based stuff of things you can do in your classroom to put your students like literally 40 years ahead of where I was as a 40-year-old in my understanding of how my body works. So yeah, teachers, please get in touch as well.
Excellent. Well, Ruben, thank you so much. It's certainly, I've learned a lot, and I've realized how much I didn't learn at school, but the way you put it over is very fun and entertaining. And so I'm going to look forward to continuing to follow you. And once again, I appreciate your time today. Check out the Big Fat Myths. There's quite some quite cool stuff in there as well. And thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, then please go over to iTunes and subscribe to the Escape Your Limits podcast. Leave a review, leave a comment. It really would help us a lot to continue to keep these going.